Elijah's stand, conquering doubt and desire through divine fire. There are moments in human history when a single individual stands so firmly in faith that the atmosphere itself seems to change. The air grows heavy with decision, silence presses in, heaven waits, and fire falls. Elijah's story is not merely ancient history. It is a mirror held up to every soul that has ever wavered between trust and fear, obedience and desire, spirit and flesh. His stand on Mount Carmel was not only against false prophets, it was against doubt itself, both in the nation and within the human heart. Elijah appears in Scripture suddenly, without genealogy, without explanation, as if summoned directly from the invisible realm. His name means, "The Lord is my God," and everything about his life becomes a living declaration of that truth. He stands in an age of compromise, where truth has been diluted, worship has been commercialized, and desire has replaced devotion. Israel wavers between the Lord and Baal, just as modern humanity wavers between faith and appetite, conviction and comfort. This is why Elijah's stand matters now more than ever. His confrontation is not simply about idols made of stone or wood. It is about internal altars, those hidden places where fear, pleasure, doubt, and ambition compete with the voice of God. The fire that fell on Mount Carmel was not only meant to consume a sacrifice, it was meant to awaken a people who had forgotten what it meant to burn with divine purpose. To conquer doubt and desire is not to suppress emotion or deny struggle. Elijah himself was no stranger to fear, exhaustion, or loneliness. Yet what sets him apart is his refusal to let those states define his allegiance. He understood something essential. Divine fire does not fall on divided altars. Heaven responds to clarity. God answers when a heart decides. This series explores Elijah's stand not as distant theology, but as a living blueprint for spiritual victory. It speaks to those wrestling with temptation, uncertainty, distraction, and inner conflict. It is for those who feel the pull of the flesh, yet sense the call of something higher. Elijah's story teaches us that when divine fire burns within, doubt loses its voice, desire finds its rightful place, and the soul remembers who it belongs to. What follows is not merely teaching, it is an invitation to rebuild the altar, to confront what competes with God in silence, and to stand even when standing feels costly. The battle between doubt and desire. Why the altar was broken. Before fire ever fell from heaven, something else had already been lost. The altar of the Lord was broken. This detail in the story of Elijah is not incidental, it is foundational. A broken altar represents a divided heart, a neglected devotion, and a faith weakened by prolonged compromise. Elijah did not begin by calling down fire. He began by repairing what had been torn down, and in doing so, he revealed the true source of Israel's spiritual collapse. Doubt rarely enters loudly. It seeps in quietly, often disguised as reason, practicality, or emotional self-protection. Desire follows closely behind, offering comfort, pleasure, or control where trust feels risky. Over time, these two forces work together to dismantle the altar of faith stone by stone, not through rebellion, but through neglect, not through denial of God, but through postponement of obedience. Israel had not formally rejected the Lord, they had simply added alternatives. Baal worship did not replace God worship, it competed with it. This is why Elijah's question cuts so deeply. How long will you waver between two opinions? The problem was not ignorance. It was indecision. The heart cannot burn with divine fire while negotiating with desire. The altar represents the place of surrender. It is where the will is laid down, where appetite bows to purpose, and where trust overrides fear. When that place is neglected, desire takes the lead. Desire is not inherently evil, but when it governs instead of serves, it becomes destructive. Doubt gives desire permission. It whispers, God may not come through. And desire replies, then take matters into your own hands. This pattern repeats throughout human experience. When prayers seem unanswered, desire grows impatient. When obedience feels costly, doubt questions its value. Slowly, the altar cracks. Faith becomes theoretical rather than lived. Devotion becomes occasional rather than absolute. And eventually, the fire goes out. Elijah understood that the real battle was not against the prophets of Baal. It was against the internal confusion of the people. A divided heart cannot witness divine power clearly. This is why he called all Israel near, not to impress them, but to confront them with a choice. Divine fire does not fall on ambiguity. Heaven responds to decision. Rebuilding the altar required intentional effort. 12 stones representing the whole of Israel were gathered and set in place. This act alone was a rebuke to fragmentation. Elijah was declaring that God had not changed his covenant, even if the people had neglected it. Restoration begins when we stop redefining truth to match our comfort and instead realign ourselves with what was always true. Doubt resists rebuilding because rebuilding demands vulnerability. It requires admitting that something sacred was abandoned. Desire resists rebuilding because the altar threatens its dominance. To rebuild is to say, this no longer rules me. And that declaration invites resistance from within. Notice that Elijah rebuilt the altar publicly. There was no secrecy, no private compromise. Restoration happened in the open. This is significant. Doubt thrives in isolation. Desire grows in secrecy, but divine fire falls where surrender is visible and complete. After rebuilding the altar, Elijah arranged the wood and prepared the sacrifice. Nothing was rushed. This teaches a crucial principle. Spiritual authority is not emotional impulsiveness. It is patient alignment. Elijah was not anxious for fire. He was confident in obedience. He did not beg. He prepared. Then came the most counterintuitive act of all. He drenched the sacrifice with water, not once, not twice, but until everything was soaked. This was not theatrics. It was a direct assault on doubt. Elijah removed every possibility of human explanation. When fire came, it would be undeniable. Doubt always looks for alternative explanations. Desire wants shortcuts. Elijah allowed neither. He made the situation humanly impossible so that divine intervention would be unmistakable. This is what it means to conquer doubt, not by arguing with it, but by positioning oneself so fully in obedience that only God can be credited with the outcome. When the altar is restored, desire does not disappear. It is reordered. It no longer seeks control. It seeks alignment. Doubt does not vanish instantly, but it loses authority. Fire does not fall because doubt is gone. Fire falls because surrender is complete. The modern believer faces the same challenge. Altars are still broken, not by persecution, but by distraction, not by denial, but by divided attention. To conquer doubt and desire, one must first acknowledge where the altar has been neglected. What competes for devotion? What justifies delay? What weakens resolve? Elijah's stand teaches us that revival does not begin with emotion. It begins with repair. Fire follows structure, power follows order, and heaven responds when the heart chooses clarity over comfort. If this message is speaking to you, take a moment now to support this work. Subscribe to the channel and remain connected, because what follows in the next topics will go even deeper into how divine fire transforms the inner battle and restores spiritual authority. Fire from heaven, how divine power silences doubt and reorders desire. When the fire finally fell from heaven, it did more than consume a sacrifice. It silenced arguments, dismantled illusions, and exposed the true condition of every heart present. This moment was not theatrical spectacle. It was spiritual clarity made visible. Fire from heaven is never merely about power. It is about authority. And authority, once revealed, leaves no room for negotiation with doubt or uncontrolled desire. Before the fire, Israel was undecided. After the fire, they fell on their faces. That transformation did not occur because Elijah spoke persuasively or because logic overcame confusion. It happened because divine fire bypasses debate. Doubt thrives where God feels distant or abstract. Fire makes him undeniable. It collapses inner resistance by revealing that God is not an idea to be discussed, but a presence to be reckoned with. Divine fire represents the moment when God intervenes not according to human expectation, but according to eternal purpose. Elijah's prayer was brief, almost understated. There was no emotional frenzy, no desperation. This teaches a critical lesson. Spiritual authority does not shout, it stands. Elijah was not trying to convince God, he was aligning with him. Doubt, by contrast, is always noisy. It asks many questions because it fears decisive answers. When the fire fell, it consumed everything: the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and even the water. This total consumption is symbolic and deeply personal. Divine fire does not negotiate with partial surrender. It consumes what is offered entirely. In spiritual terms, this means that when God moves decisively, he addresses not only visible actions, but hidden motivations, buried fears, and unspoken desires. Desire, when unchecked, always seeks survival. It wants to remain untouched, rationalized, protected. Divine fire exposes desire's limits. It shows that what the flesh clings to cannot withstand the presence of God. This is why many fear divine intervention. Fire leaves nothing untouched. It does not merely improve a person, it transforms them. Doubt often disguises itself as humility. It says, "Who am I to expect God to act?" But this kind of doubt is not humility. It is fear of disappointment. Elijah did not hesitate because he had already resolved that obedience mattered more than outcome. Faith that depends on visible results is fragile. Faith that stands regardless of outcome invites fire. The fire from heaven did not come to reward Elijah personally. It came to restore order. Israel needed to see clearly again. Doubt had blurred their spiritual vision, and desire had distorted their priorities. Fire restored perspective instantly. Suddenly Baal was silent. Suddenly excuses vanished. Suddenly truth stood alone. This reveals a difficult reality. Doubt survives only as long as alternatives appear equally valid. When truth is revealed in power, doubt has nowhere to stand. Desire too loses leverage when its promises are exposed as empty. The people did not intellectually conclude that the Lord was God, they witnessed it. In modern life, many wait for clarity before obedience. Elijah teaches the opposite. Obedience creates the conditions for clarity. Fire did not fall because Israel believed. Fire fell because Elijah obeyed. Belief followed. This principle challenges the way many approach faith. They want reassurance before surrender. They want certainty before commitment. But divine fire responds to alignment, not analysis. Elijah did not know how the fire would fall, when it would fall, or what form it would take. He knew only that obedience demanded action, not guarantees. When fire falls, desire is not destroyed, it is purified. Desire, once misdirected, begins to long for what lasts. Pleasure loses its urgency. Control loosens its grip. The heart begins to hunger for presence rather than outcomes. This is the reordering that divine fire brings. It does not numb desire, it elevates it. Doubt also undergoes transformation. It is not merely silenced, it is re-educated. After fire, doubt no longer asks whether God is real. It asks how to live faithfully in his presence. This shift is essential. Faith is not the absence of questions, it is the refusal to let questions govern allegiance. The people's response reveals another layer of truth. They fell on their faces and declared, "The Lord, He is God." But notice that they did not speak before the fire. Silence preceded revelation. Doubt speaks loudly before truth is revealed. After revelation, silence becomes appropriate. This moment also exposes the danger of emotional faith. The people responded strongly, but Elijah knew emotion alone could not sustain obedience. Fire awakens, but discipline sustains. This is why the story does not end on Mount Carmel. Victory over doubt and desire is not a single event. It is a process that begins with revelation and continues through endurance. Divine fire removes excuses. After Mount Carmel, Israel could no longer claim confusion. They had seen. Responsibility follows revelation. This is why some resist deep encounters with God. Fire demands response. Once truth is revealed, neutrality becomes impossible. Elijah's confidence was rooted in something deeper than courage. It was rooted in intimacy. He had stood before God long before he stood before people. Public authority flows from private surrender. Doubt weakens when intimacy deepens. Desire loses dominance when presence satisfies. This teaches an uncomfortable truth. Many struggles persist, not because God is absent, but because intimacy is avoided. Fire falls where relationship already exists. Elijah did not build intimacy on Mount Carmel. He revealed it there. Fire also separates. It distinguishes what is genuine from what is performative. The prophets of Baal cried out all day, cut themselves, and exhausted every method. Noise did not move heaven. Fire fell in silence. This contrast exposes a spiritual law. Desperation without alignment produces exhaustion, not power. Desire often confuses intensity with authenticity. Doubt confuses effort with faith. Divine fire responds to neither. It responds to alignment, surrender, and truth. When the fire fell, it consumed even the stones. Stones represent permanence, identity, and structure. God was demonstrating that nothing built apart from Him endures. This is both sobering and liberating. It means that what cannot survive divine fire was never meant to last. After fire, Elijah did not celebrate publicly. He acted decisively. This reveals maturity. Victory over doubt is not celebrated emotionally. It is secured practically. Elijah understood that moments of revelation must be followed by action, or confusion returns. For the modern believer, divine fire may not appear visibly, but its effects are just as real. There are moments when God intervenes with undeniable clarity through conviction, truth, exposure, or deliverance. In those moments, doubt is quiet and desire is humbled. The danger lies in treating those moments as emotional peaks rather than turning points. Fire demands stewardship. What is revealed must be protected. What is purified must be maintained. Elijah's stand did not end with fire. It intensified afterward. If this teaching is strengthening you and helping you understand the deeper battle between doubt, desire, and divine authority, stay connected. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next part of this journey, where we will explore what happens after the fire falls and why endurance is the true test of faith. The fire on Mount Carmel was unmistakable, but it was not the end of Elijah's battle. In many ways, it was only the beginning. Divine fire exposes truth, silences doubt, and reorders desire in a moment. But what follows revelation is where faith is truly tested. After the crowd fell on their faces and confessed that the Lord is God, Elijah moved from public triumph into private endurance. This transition reveals one of the most misunderstood truths of spiritual life. Victory over doubt and desire is not secured by one powerful encounter, but by what happens after the fire fades and the silence returns. Immediately after the fire, Elijah confronted the false prophets, decisively removing what had corrupted the nation. This action was not fueled by emotion, but by obedience. Fire clarifies priorities. When divine authority is revealed, hesitation becomes disobedience. Elijah understood that compromise cannot coexist with restored worship. Doubt always seeks a return path, and desire always looks for an opening. Removing false influence was not cruelty, it was protection. Spiritual clarity demands separation from what feeds confusion. Yet even after this decisive moment, Elijah's greatest test was still ahead. The narrative shifts quickly from triumph to tension. The sky was still dry. The drought that Elijah had declared years earlier had not yet ended. This is significant. Fire fell instantly, but rain did not. Many expect that once doubt is conquered and desire is reordered, relief will immediately follow. Elijah's story teaches the opposite. Sometimes God reveals his power first and delays visible provision afterward to train endurance. Elijah went up to the mountain again, not to confront enemies, but to pray. He lowered himself to the ground and placed his face between his knees. This posture reveals humility, dependence, and persistence. The prophet, who had just commanded fire from heaven, now prayed repeatedly for rain. This teaches a profound lesson. Authority in public does not eliminate dependence in private. Doubt is not only conquered by dramatic moments, it is restrained by continual surrender. Elijah sent his servant to look toward the sea again and again. 6 times nothing appeared. Each report of emptiness could have reopened doubt. Desire could have whispered that perhaps the moment had passed, that God had done enough, or that expectations should be lowered. But Elijah did not move. He did not change posture. He did not reinterpret the promise. He stayed. This persistence exposes a core truth about faith. Revelation may be instant, but fulfillment often requires endurance. Doubt grows strongest in the waiting phase. Desire becomes restless when results delay. Elijah's ability to remain grounded after divine fire shows that his faith was not dependent on emotional intensity, but on trust in God's word. When the servant finally reported a small cloud, Elijah responded with certainty, disproportionate to the evidence. A cloud the size of a man's hand was enough. Fire had already taught him that God does not need scale to act. This moment reveals how divine encounters reshape perception. After fire, Elijah no longer measured possibility by appearance. Doubt loses its grip when perception is transformed. But the story takes an unexpected turn. Shortly after rain comes, Elijah runs ahead of Ahab's chariot in supernatural strength. This surge of energy suggests divine empowerment. Yet immediately after this, Elijah receives a threat from Jezebel. One message, one voice is enough to drive him into fear and flight. This contrast is jarring. How can the man who stood unshaken before hundreds of false prophets collapse after a single threat? This moment reveals the complexity of conquering doubt and desire. Victory in one arena does not make a person immune in all others. Elijah's exhaustion made him vulnerable. Desire for rest, safety, and escape resurfaced. Doubt returned in a different form, not questioning God's power, but questioning his own purpose. He fled not because he stopped believing in God, but because he stopped believing his life still mattered. Under the broom tree, Elijah asked to die. This prayer reveals something essential. Even the most faithful servants can reach a point where desire for relief outweighs desire for obedience. Doubt here is not theological, it is existential. It asks, what is the point? This form of doubt is more dangerous because it hides behind fatigue and disappointment. God's response is instructive. He did not rebuke Elijah. He fed him. He let him sleep. Before addressing Elijah's thoughts, God addressed his body. This teaches a crucial truth about spiritual warfare. Some battles are not won through confrontation, but through restoration. Desire becomes destructive when basic needs are ignored. Doubt deepens when exhaustion is spiritualized instead of healed. After Elijah was strengthened, God spoke, not in fire, not in wind, not in earthquake, but in a gentle whisper. This moment reframes everything. Fire reveals authority. Silence reveals intimacy. Doubt is not only silenced by power, it is healed by presence. Desire is not only reordered by fear of God, it is satisfied by closeness to Him. The whisper did not contradict the fire, it completed it. Elijah learned that divine fire is not always loud. Sometimes the most transformative moments are quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. Those who chase constant intensity often miss sustained presence. Elijah had to learn that God was not only in the dramatic confrontation, but also in the slow rebuilding of hope. God asked Elijah a question: "What are you doing here?" This was not accusation, it was invitation. It invited Elijah to articulate his inner state. Doubt loses power when it is named honestly. Desire loses dominance when it is exposed in God's presence. Elijah poured out his frustration, loneliness, and sense of failure. God listened. Then God responded with direction, not reassurance. He gave Elijah new assignments, new purpose, and a successor. This reveals another essential truth. Doubt fades when purpose is renewed. Desire realigns when vision expands beyond self. God did not remove Elijah's feelings. He redirected his focus. Elijah learned that conquering doubt and desire is not about maintaining constant spiritual highs. It is about returning to obedience even after collapse. Faithfulness is proven not by never faltering, but by continuing after faltering. Elijah's story dismantles the illusion of invulnerability and replaces it with resilience. For those walking this path today, Elijah's journey offers deep comfort and sober instruction. Moments of fire do not exempt anyone from weariness. Divine encounters do not eliminate the need for rest, nourishment, and honest prayer. Doubt may return in new forms, and desire may shift its strategies, but neither has the final word. Endurance is forged in the quiet seasons. It is learned when no crowd watches, when no fire falls, and when faith must choose to stand without immediate reward. Elijah's true strength was not that he never feared, but that he kept returning to God even when fear spoke loudly. If this teaching is helping you understand the deeper journey of faith after the fire, stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you can continue this series and move forward into the next topic, where we will explore how divine fire reshapes identity and calling over a lifetime, not just in a single moment. After the silence on Horeb, after the whisper that replaced the fire, Elijah's journey entered its most formative phase. This was the stage where identity was no longer defined by confrontation, but by continuity. Divine fire had revealed God's authority. The whisper had revealed God's nearness. Now Elijah had to learn how divine fire reshapes a person, not for a moment, but for a lifetime. This is where many believers struggle most, because it requires letting go not only of doubt and destructive desire, but also of old images of oneself. Elijah had known himself as the prophet who stood alone, the voice crying against compromise, the man who called fire from heaven. That identity had sustained him in confrontation, but it could not sustain him in longevity. God does not only burn away idols, He also burns away narrow self-concepts. Divine fire refines not only behavior, but self-understanding. Elijah was being prepared for a transition, and transitions often feel like loss before they feel like fulfillment. God's instruction to Elijah after Horeb was precise. He was told to anoint new leaders and to call Elisha as his successor. This moment reveals a profound truth about divine fire. It does not exist to glorify the vessel, but to extend the mission. Desire often clings to relevance, visibility and uniqueness. Doubt fears being replaced or forgotten. God confronts both by showing that purpose is larger than any individual role. For Elijah, this was not a demotion, it was an expansion. Yet expansion often feels threatening to the ego. To mentor another prophet meant sharing authority, visibility, and legacy. This required a deeper surrender than standing against false prophets. It required releasing control over how his story would be remembered. Divine fire had already conquered external opposition. Now it had to conquer internal attachment. When Elijah encountered Elisha, the moment was quiet and symbolic. He placed his mantle over him and walked away. No speech, no explanation. This act demonstrated a maturity forged by divine fire. Elijah did not negotiate his obedience. He did not seek affirmation. He trusted that God was orchestrating something beyond his full understanding. This stage of Elijah's life teaches that doubt evolves. Earlier, doubt questioned God's power. Later, doubt questioned purpose, relevance, and continuity. Desire evolves as well. It moves from craving pleasure to craving significance. Divine fire addresses both by redefining identity, not around achievement, but around obedience. Elijah continued to serve, teach, and walk with Elisha. The relationship was not sentimental, it was demanding. Elisha was persistent, refusing to leave Elijah's side. This persistence mirrored Elijah's earlier perseverance in prayer. The fire that once fell from heaven was now being transmitted through example, discipline, and daily faithfulness. This is how divine fire multiplies, not through spectacle, but through proximity. As the time approached for Elijah's departure, the narrative becomes increasingly focused on separation. Again and again, Elijah tested Elisha's resolve by telling him to stay behind. Each time, Elisha refused. This sequence reveals another layer of conquering desire. Desire often seeks comfort and avoids endings. Faith, refined by divine fire, accepts transitions without bitterness. Elijah's willingness to be left behind while Elisha pressed forward reveals his inner transformation. There was no jealousy, no insecurity. Divine fire had freed him from comparison. He no longer needed to prove anything. His confidence rested in obedience already lived, not in recognition still to come. The final moment of Elijah's earthly journey was not marked by decline or defeat, but by transcendence. He did not die in obscurity. He was taken up in a whirlwind with chariots of fire. This was not a reward for perfection, but a testimony to alignment. His life had become so intertwined with divine purpose that his departure mirrored his calling. The chariots of fire were not merely transportation, they were confirmation. God was declaring that Elijah's stand, his endurance, his quiet obedience, and his willingness to release control had all been seen. Doubt had no place here. Desire had been purified completely. What remained was union with purpose. This moment also reveals that divine fire ultimately leads not to exhaustion, but to elevation. Not elevation in human terms, but in spiritual continuity. Elijah did not disappear. His spirit and mission continued through Elisha. Fire does not end with one generation, it passes forward. For the believer today, this stage of Elijah's story addresses a subtle but powerful struggle. The fear that obedience will lead to obscurity, replacement, or irrelevance. Divine fire counters this fear by teaching that significance is not measured by visibility, but by faithfulness. The desire to be remembered fades when the desire to obey matures. Doubt at this stage whispers, "Have I done enough?" Desire whispers, "Will I still matter?" Divine fire answers both by shifting focus from self to legacy. Elijah learned that the greatest confirmation of a life well lived is not applause, but continuity of purpose beyond oneself. This reshaping of identity requires deep trust. It requires releasing timelines, outcomes, and comparisons. It requires accepting that God's work is ongoing and larger than personal narratives. Elijah's final days were marked not by striving, but by peace. This peace was not passive. It was earned through years of surrender. Elijah's stand, therefore, was not confined to Mount Carmel. It extended into mentorship, transition, and release. Conquering doubt and desire is not a single battle. It is a lifelong realignment. Divine fire does not simply empower, it redefines. Many resist this stage because it feels like loss of control, yet it is here that the deepest freedom is found. Elijah no longer needed to defend truth publicly because truth had already defended him internally. He no longer needed to prove God's power because his life had become evidence of it. If you find yourself in a season where your role is changing, where visibility is shifting, or where God seems to be asking you to release what once defined you, Elijah's journey speaks directly to you. Divine fire is not abandoning you, it is refining you for longevity. As we move toward the final topic, we will explore how Elijah's stand ultimately points beyond himself, revealing how divine fire prepares the soul not only for earthly obedience, but for eternal alignment. If this message is strengthening your understanding of purpose, identity, and long-term faithfulness, stay connected. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the final part of this series, where everything comes together and Elijah's stand is revealed as a blueprint for conquering doubt and desire until the very end. Elijah's journey reaches its deepest meaning not in the fire, not in the whisper, and not even in the whirlwind, but in what his life ultimately reveals about the long struggle between doubt, desire, and eternal alignment. By the time Elijah is taken from the earth, his battle is no longer external. It is no longer about idols, enemies, or even personal survival. It is about finishing well. This final stage of Elijah's stand teaches that conquering doubt and desire is not about intensity at the beginning, but about coherence at the end, when belief, obedience, and identity finally converge. Throughout Elijah's life, doubt appeared in many forms. At first, it challenged God's authority in the nation. Later, it questioned Elijah's own endurance, purpose, and worth. Desire followed closely, sometimes as hunger for righteousness, sometimes as exhaustion longing for escape, sometimes as the subtle pull to remain central rather than release control. Divine fire addressed each stage differently, not by eliminating struggle, but by reshaping Elijah's inner posture until nothing remained unresolved. What makes Elijah's conclusion so powerful is that there is no unfinished argument between him and God. There is no bitterness, no demand for explanation, no attempt to secure legacy. His life closes not with questions, but with alignment. This is rare. Many begin in faith but end in resentment. Others burn brightly early but fade into compromise. Elijah's stand shows another path, one where the soul grows quieter as faith grows stronger. By the end, Elijah no longer needs dramatic signs to affirm God's presence. He walks with certainty that obedience itself is communion. Doubt no longer speaks because it has nothing left to negotiate. Desire no longer demands satisfaction because it has been trained to rest in God rather than outcomes. This is the fruit of a life repeatedly surrendered. One of the most overlooked truths in Elijah's story is that his greatest miracle may not have been calling down fire, but allowing himself to be replaced without resistance. This act alone reveals complete freedom from ego-driven desire. Many can confront external enemies, few can release internal attachment. Elijah's willingness to let Elisha receive a double portion shows that divine fire had accomplished its deepest work. It had burned away the need to be exceptional. This freedom is essential to eternal alignment. Desire that seeks recognition cannot endure beyond this life. Doubt that fears insignificance cannot cross into eternity. Divine fire prepares the soul by loosening its grip on temporal validation and strengthening its trust in eternal purpose. Elijah's departure was not dramatic because he sought drama. It was peaceful because nothing in him resisted God's timing. The whirlwind that carried Elijah was not chaos. It was transition. Scripture presents it not as disruption, but as completion. This teaches a sobering truth. The way a person lives determines how they leave. Those ruled by unresolved doubt cling. Those governed by unpurified desire resist. Those refined by divine fire depart without fear. Elijah's story also teaches that conquering doubt and desire is inseparable from confronting loneliness. Elijah often stood alone, misunderstood, isolated and unseen. Yet solitude did not weaken him, it clarified him. Divine fire often leads into loneliness before it leads into clarity. This is because distraction feeds doubt, and noise amplifies desire. Solitude strips both away. Many avoid solitude because it exposes inner unrest. Elijah embraced it because it revealed inner truth. By the end of his life, Elijah no longer needed crowds to validate his calling. He did not fear being unseen. His security rested in alignment, not acknowledgement. This final stage reveals that faith matures when the soul stops asking what it will gain and starts asking what it is being shaped to become. Elijah was not shaped to be remembered, he was shaped to be faithful. His legacy emerged naturally, without pursuit. This is the paradox of divine fire. Those who stop seeking impact often leave the deepest one. Elijah's stand ultimately points beyond himself. His reappearance centuries later alongside Moses during the Transfiguration reveals that his life was never confined to one moment in history. Divine fire prepares a person not only for earthly obedience, but for eternal participation in God's unfolding purpose. Elijah's faith did not expire with his body, it was woven into eternity. This should reshape how doubt and desire are understood. Doubt is not merely disbelief, it is misalignment with eternal perspective. Desire is not merely appetite, it is longing misdirected toward temporary fulfillment. Divine fire corrects both by anchoring the soul beyond time. For those walking this path today, Elijah's life offers both warning and hope. The warning is that unresolved doubt and unchecked desire will eventually exhaust faith. The hope is that surrender, even repeated surrender, leads to rest. Divine fire does not demand perfection, it demands honesty. Elijah faltered, fled, questioned, and despaired, but he always returned. Returning is the key. Conquering doubt and desire does not mean never feeling them. It means refusing to let them define direction. Elijah's life was not marked by unbroken confidence, but by consistent realignment. Each return strengthened him, each surrender refined him. By the end, Elijah did not need to stand against anything. He simply stood with God. This is the final victory. When faith reaches this stage, doubt has nothing left to oppose, and desire has nothing left to demand. Elijah's stand, therefore, is not about dramatic faith reserved for prophets. It is about ordinary faith refined over time. It is about choosing alignment when answers are delayed, choosing obedience when recognition fades, and choosing surrender when control must be released. This is the divine fire that endures, not the fire that consumes an altar once, but the fire that quietly shapes a life until it is no longer divided. If this series has helped you see faith, doubt, and desire more clearly, and if it has strengthened your resolve to walk this path with honesty and endurance, subscribe to the channel now. Stay connected, because this journey of spiritual clarity, discipline, and inner victory continues, and you are not meant to walk it alone.